Hi Guy, welcome back. TV spoilers. Young and the Restless reveal that the Newmans had survived enough crises to understand that some storms don't arrive from the outside, they rise from the quiet sensation of being hunted. This time, what shook the family wasn't a financial collapse or a boardroom betrayal, but a name they believed had been locked away with the past. The news that Matt had vanished from custody struck the Newman world like a blade of ice, pressed against their pride. Panic didn't explode into screams. It spread like a slow drop in temperature inside a room that had always stayed warm with power. They weren't only afraid that Matt was free, they were afraid of something worse. A man driven far past reason now had the one thing that made him most dangerous. And that freedom carried a vow of revenge so absolute it didn't need to be spoken aloud. To make an empire tremble, Matt was supposed to walk into a courtroom. He was supposed to face the harsh glare of justice. He was supposed to be crushed by the very system Victor Newman had always believed he could shape, bend, and command. Instead, reality betrayed them in the cruelest way. Matt never made it to trial. He disappeared before the courthouse doors could even open. For the Newmans, this wasn't a simple escape, it was an insult. A declaration that no matter how many walls they built, no matter how many people they paid, no matter how tightly they gripped the law, there were still cracks wide enough for rage to slip through. Matt didn't break out to survive. He broke out to transform his existence into punishment. And that truth made their fear take a shape they could almost see, like a shadow moving closer without revealing its face. Victor understood faster than anyone, because he had lived too long inside the machinery of power to recognize the most dangerous enemy. It wasn't the one who wanted to win, it was the one who only wanted to destroy. Matt was no longer a variable on Victor's chessboard. He was a spark capable of igniting the entire board, the table, and the room around it. Victor's composure wasn't calmness so much as armor forged through years of teaching himself that weakness was a luxury he could never afford. He wouldn't let his family see that. Even he felt a rare, sharp jolt when he heard the news. But inside, something he despised rose like poison, the sensation of losing control. Victor hated that feeling more than he hated any rival. And that hatred made him even more dangerous. He raised the family's alert level to a place the Newmans rarely had to go. This wasn't merely extra security guards or a reminder to be careful when leaving the house. This was a shift in the rhythm of their lives. A sudden instinctive tightening of an empire that had realized its power was no longer an unbreakable shield. Victor looked at each member of his family and knew they would react differently, and those reactions could become fractures. One would deny the danger because fear was unbearable. Another would lash out because pride had been wounded. Another might sense opportunity in the chaos, using it to compete for Victor's approval. And all of it threatened to intensify the crisis, because the enemy outside hadn't even shown his face. Yet the division inside could still be born on its own. Their panic took a different form than the world expected. It wasn't loud, messy disorder. It was an electric current running beneath everything, sharpening their eyes, tightening their voices, turning every silence into something heavy enough to suffocate. They began to live under the idea that Matt could strike at any time, anywhere, in a way no one could predict. The deepest fear wasn't a direct attack, it was a blow to what they couldn't protect fast enough. Reputation, safety, and the certainty that they always decided the rules of the game. The Newmans were used to overpowering others. Now they had to adjust to being the ones hunted. The true horror of Matt wasn't only that he escaped. It was that his motivation had crossed into something extreme. Before, he could have been restrained by hope of beating the charges, hope of making a legal deal, hope of bargaining his way into survival. Now, all that remained was hatred. And a person who wants nothing except to make someone else suffer becomes more unpredictable than any enemy with a clear goal. Matt didn't need to win. Matt only needed the Newmans to feel fear. The moment they felt it, he had already taken something from them. Victor tried to turn that fear into discipline. He refused to let the family panic publicly, because he understood that panic could leak into the world. And the world was full of enemies waiting for the Newmans to show weakness. But banning panic didn't erase it, it pushed it deeper, where it transformed into pressure. And pressure forced every Newman to confront themselves. If Matt appeared, who would he target first? Who would he drag down to force the family to kneel? No one spoke the question aloud, but it lived inside them, sharpening the air like metal. Victor warned them that Matt could attack at any moment, without logic, without a pattern. That warning was both an order and a way for Victor to convince himself he still commanded the situation. Yet what disturbed him most was the flaw he knew too well in his own instincts. He believed every threat could be measured and crushed. With Matt, that might not be true. If Matt had escaped, it meant there was a gap in the system Victor hadn't seen. And that gap didn't just threaten the family, it threatened Victor's belief in himself. The tension rose even further because the Newmans had no information. They didn't know where Matt was, what he was planning, or whether he had help. Without facts, every assumption became terrifying. A car moving too slowly outside the gate could feel like a sign. A strange phone call could feel like bait. A late-arriving knock could feel like the first step of an invasion. In the Newman world where power had always given them the illusion, they could see everything. This blindness was humiliation. That humiliation pushed them into a state of constant defense and raw nerves. The exact state where mistakes were easiest to make. But the most telling transformation wasn't fear, it was suspicion. When crisis struck, the Newmans had a way of searching for someone to blame. And this time the timing of Matt's escape made a darker possibility emerge. Maybe someone had allowed it to happen. Maybe there had been a deliberate opening. Or worse, maybe an unseen hand wanted the Newmans to spiral into panic. Victor refused to let that thought spread because if it did, it could tear apart the one foundation he insisted must remain sacred: unquestioned loyalty to the family. Still, even Victor couldn't deny that a man like Matt didn't simply vanish through luck alone. In that moment, Victor's strength wasn't measured by how loudly he barked commands, but by how he became the axis of the family's tension and forced it into structure. He tightened security, controlled schedules, turned every movement into strategy. Yet the tighter he made their world, the more the family began to feel trapped inside their own home, as if they were becoming prisoners of a threat that hadn't even shown itself. And that was where Matt had already won a part of this war. He didn't need to appear. He only needed the Newmans to live as though he might appear. What made it truly chilling was Matt's vow. It didn't need to be recorded. It didn't need to hit the news. The Newmans felt it anyway, like a message carved into skin: the family must pay. A vow like that is not a sentence, it is a direction, a purpose, a life rebuilt around revenge. Matt was no longer a fugitive running from justice. He had become a shadow with a single mission. And a shadow with a mission is far more frightening than an enemy you can see. Night fell, and everything inside the Newman estate remained bright, polished, protected by layers of surveillance and security. But under the light, fear became even clearer because there was nowhere for it to hide. Victor stood in that artificial calm, knowing he had to act before Matt struck. He told himself he could still control the board, still reshape the outcome. And then a sudden alert arrived, cold sentence that tightened his chest like a fist. Matt hadn't only disappeared, he had left proof he was close, closer than anyone imagined. And his first target might not be Victor at all, but the person the Newmans would least expect. After Matt vanished from custody, the Newman family tried to cling to a fragile belief that the situation could be contained. This was just another crisis Victor could crush the way he always had. But it was Matt's silence in the beginning that felt the most terrifying. Because it didn't sound like a desperate fugitive scrambling to survive. It sounded like a man calmly choosing the perfect moment to strike. In the Newman world, where power is measured by control, an enemy who knows how to wait is the purest form of nightmare. Matt didn't rush into a direct attack. He didn't spill blood or create a headline-grabbing spectacle to announce his freedom. Instead, he went for the family's weakest point: the fear of exposure. The dread of being dragged back into mistakes they had buried beneath wealth, status, and reputation. Within hours, phones inside the Newman estate began to buzz, each vibration like a knock on the mind. A warning that Matt hadn't just escaped into the world outside. Somehow, he had found a way to step inside their walls without touching a single lock. The first message landed on Victoria's screen with brutal simplicity. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. A single line was enough to make her freeze, as if the air had been pulled from the room. Matt had reached straight for the wound she thought she'd already stitched closed. Her recent business setbacks. The decision she believed would secure victory but instead boomeranged into public doubt. The exhausting reality of always being watched even by her own blood. Victoria had built her life on pressure. She had learned to survive because pressure sharpened her, forced her to prove herself again and again. But this time felt different. Matt wasn't attacking the outcome of her failures. He was attacking the deepest fear underneath them, that she might not be as brilliant as people assumed, that her leadership might be slipping, that Newman Enterprises could fall under her watch and she'd never live down the shame. She didn't collapse into chaos, but confusion crawled through her thoughts, heavy and relentless, until she could no longer separate reality from what Matt was planting in her mind. She stared at her phone like it was cracked glass, knowing that one wrong reaction could turn a quiet fracture into a collapse. That unsettling shock spread faster than any emergency meeting, because it didn't require a conversation. One message was enough. It pushed Victoria into a private war with her own reflection, forcing her to question whether her strength was real or simply a performance she'd perfected. And what made it worse was the truth that she couldn't admit it out loud. She couldn't call Victor or Nick and confess that a fugitive was manipulating her. With a handful of words, Victoria hated feeling vulnerable. She hated losing her footing. She hated knowing Matt had successfully placed her on the defensive. So she swallowed it in silence until that silence began to poison her from the inside. Not long after, similar messages arrived for Nick and Sharon. But Matt's precision was even more vicious here. They had only just begun rebuilding something fragile between them, something mature, careful, and painfully earned. Their connection wasn't the reckless passion of the past, it was a slow attempt at healing. Scarred but hopeful. Matt seemed to understand that, and he didn't waste time. Nick's message felt like a reminder that trouble never truly disappeared in their lives, it only hid under the surface, waiting to rise again. Sharon's message felt like an icy hand dragging her back into memories she worked so hard to survive. In seconds, the bond they'd been trying to strengthen started to feel like paper held too close to flame. Nick looked at Sharon with a mix of tenderness and dread, afraid the past could swallow them whole again. Sharon felt herself slipping toward the edge of the emotional abyss she had fought so hard to climb out of. The danger wasn't a loud argument or obvious blame. They both knew that would be too easy, too predictable. The real damage was quieter, suspicion settling like dust across every glance, every pause, every word they didn't say. Nick started wondering how much Matt knew and what exactly he planned to use against him. Sharon started wondering whether Nick truly had the patience to survive another spiral of chaos, or whether she would once again be left alone with the weight of her own pain. Matt didn't need to create a direct explosion between them. He only had to remind them of everything that once broke them, and the cracks began to widen on their own. Their relationship didn't shatter instantly, but it fractured in the most dangerous way, slowly and silently through the weakening of trust. While Nick and Sharon were pulled backward into emotional landmines, Adam received a warning that chilled him differently. Adam had spent his entire life being treated like an outsider, even while carrying the Newman name. He had grown used to having every decision questioned, every mistake judged more harshly than anyone else's. Matt targeted Adam in the most humiliating way possible, by exposing the insecurity Adam always tried to hide, his desperate hunger to be accepted, and his terror of being rejected again. The message didn't just mention Adam's bad choices. It hinted that his position in the family had never been secure, that it only took one shove at the right moment for him to become the scapegoat all over again. Adam didn't fall apart easily. His first instinct was to mask everything behind cold control, acting as though the message was meaningless, a cheap tactic from a desperate man. But inside, it struck a nerve Adam could never fully numb. He started questioning whether Matt was attacking the Newmans as a whole, or whether Matt specifically wanted to destroy Adam by turning him into the family's weakest link. And when Adam began to doubt, he didn't just doubt the people around him. He doubted himself, his instincts, his decisions, even his reasons for fighting. That inner instability made him more vulnerable than he wanted to admit. Because Matt didn't need Adam to do anything at all. He only needed Adam to lose his footing long enough to make the kind of mistake that would push the family to turn on him. Then came Nikki's message, and the tone shifted into something far more personal. If the earlier threats attacked ambition, love, or power, Nikki's message went straight for her most primal instinct, protection. Nikki had lived through too much loss to believe safety was automatic, especially not for someone like Victor. No matter how tough she became, one fear always lived inside her, that someday she wouldn't be able to stand between Victor and danger. Matt didn't describe violence. He didn't paint a graphic scenario. He didn't need to. The message felt intimate, like a whisper placed directly against her throat, as though Matt could see her worry more clearly than anyone else in the house. Nikki's blood turned cold because she understood the strategy instantly. Matt wanted her to fear for Victor. He wanted her exhausted, hyper-alert, unraveling. He wanted her anxiety to infect the entire family. Nikki fought to stay steady, but her hands trembled as she held the phone. She looked at Victor with a mix of love and helplessness, because Victor always believed he could defeat any threat through sheer force of will. While Nikki understood that some battles couldn't be won with money or intimidation, some battles were psychological, and in psychological war, even the strongest man could be brought to his knees if he was distracted by the fear of losing the people he loved. Matt was trying to break Nikki first so Victor would lose focus. So the entire Newman family would collapse under pressure without Matt ever stepping into the room. When Victor discovered that every member of the family had received a threat, he didn't need more proof. Matt wasn't just free, Matt was actively waging psychological war. And Victor hated that kind of war because Victor preferred enemies he could see. Enemies he could crush directly. Darkness, invisibility, uncertainty, those were humiliations money couldn't erase. Still, Victor refused to show panic. He called an emergency family meeting, and each person walked into that room carrying a different kind of damage, Victoria with fury and bruised pride, Nick and Sharon with unspoken fear, Adam with defensive suspicion, Nikki with protective dread, and Victor at the center brought the rage of a man being challenged inside his own kingdom. The meeting didn't explode into shouting chaos, but it was tight as wire. Because when the Newmans were threatened, they always appeared united from the outside while splitting internally underneath. Everyone had their own approach to dealing with Matt, and those differences exposed fractures they usually kept hidden. Victoria wanted immediate action, desperate to prove she wasn't intimidated. But the faster she pushed, the more likely she was to make a reckless move. Nick wanted calm strategy, but anxiety made him unsure whether waiting would only invite disaster. Sharon, already shaken, felt trapped. She wasn't a Newman in Victor's strict definition. Yet she was being dragged into their war anyway. Adam wanted control, but every sentence he offered was easy to interpret as self-serving, which only made him feel more isolated. Nikki tried to bridge the gaps, but fear softened her voice and made it harder to hold the room together against Victor's storm. Victor saw it all, and his anger deepened because he recognized the truth. This was exactly what Matt wanted. Matt didn't only want to scare them, he wanted them to mistrust each other, to tear themselves apart from within. Victor tightened security, restricted movement, locked down communication, turning every step into strategy. Yet even as he gave orders, he felt something he rarely tolerated, doubt in the air. Not everyone believed Victor was fully in control. And for Victor Newman, being questioned inside his own family was worse than any outsider's mockery. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but he knew this war was no longer only about stopping Matt. It was also about preventing the family's fragile unity from snapping. The messages didn't stop. They escalated with the steady rhythm of a countdown. Matt changed the tone, changed the approach, refused to let them adapt. Sometimes the threats felt like cold reports, facts laid out with cruel precision. Sometimes they felt like whispers, intimate enough to make each person believe Matt was standing behind them. Sometimes they were nothing more than symbols or hints, forcing the mind to create 100 terrifying possibilities. And the worst part was how personal it all felt. Matt made each member of the family believe they were being targeted individually, as if they alone were the center of punishment. In that kind of fear, people don't just panic together, they panic alone. And private fear is always more dangerous than shared fear. The shockwave soon spread into Newman Enterprises itself. At first, it was subtle: meetings interrupted, decisions delayed, leaders distracted. The company's rhythm thrown off by tension inside the family. But soon the instability evolved into mistakes. Some executives became overly cautious, freezing at any risk. Others grew reckless, determined to prove strength through bold moves. The atmosphere in the company thickened because when the Newman family faltered, the entire machine around them shook. Their rivals didn't need to know the details of Matt's escape. They only needed to sense weakness, and one misstep was enough for predators to close in. Matt didn't have to break into the corporate offices. He only had to keep Victor and his family off balance, unable to focus, unable to trust, unable to lead with the certainty that had always been their sharpest weapon. Each family member began to carry a different kind of strain. Victoria walked into meetings with eyes like blades, but insecurities she couldn't fully hide. Nick tried to stay composed, but stress made him more distant from Sharon, as if closeness would only give Matt another target. Sharon fought not to drown in old trauma, yet every new message yanked her downward by another inch. Adam, the more he was threatened, the harder he pushed to prove he couldn't be threatened, and that effort made him the most volatile person in the room. Nikki lived in a state of constant protection, trying to shield Victor from danger while also trying to shield the family from Victor's own fury. Because she knew his anger could easily make everything worse. Victor became the axis of it all, a monument of power surrounded by invisible waves. He couldn't rest. He couldn't breathe freely. He couldn't allow himself even one moment of softness. Matt had challenged him in the most insulting way possible, not with guns, not with money, but by forcing Victor to feel powerless over the heartbeat of his own family. The more Victor wanted to crush Matt quickly, the more he realized Matt didn't want a fast ending. Matt wanted the slow, deliberate torture. He wanted the Newmans to weaken over time. He wanted them exhausted, suspicious, divided. That was the true hell of him. It didn't have to strike hard if he could strike patiently. Then the ultimatum arrived. No more vague threats. No more scattered reminders. Matt sent something colder, clearer, something that didn't allow the Newmans to suit themselves with uncertainty. He demanded they pay the price. He didn't specify what that price would be because the lack of detail was the cruelest part. The price could be their reputation. It could be the collapse of Newman Enterprises. It could be the safety of the people they loved most. It could be one precise strike against the one place they could never defend in time. Matt didn't want them to guess correctly. He wanted them to guess wrong and suffer inside their own mistakes. The Newmans found themselves facing a truth they didn't want to admit. If they responded too aggressively, they might create an even bigger public crisis and expose their weakness to the world. If they responded too softly, Matt would sense full control and strike harder. Each person feared the price in a different way, and that difference made unity almost impossible. They wanted to believe Victor could protect them, but they were also afraid Victor would drag them into a war no one could win. They wanted to believe in loyalty, but the fractures were already visible. And Matt was somewhere in the shadows, waiting to slam his fist into the weakest point. As night settled, the Newman estate still glowed with wealth and security. Cameras still watched. Gates still locked. But the atmosphere wasn't peace anymore, it was a gilded cage. Everyone was trapped inside fear, suspicion, and the constant possibility of another vibration on the phone. Victoria stared out the window and felt the darkness moving closer. Nick walked the halls with his heart heavy, unsure if he was protecting his family or being pulled down by their helplessness. Sharon tried to breathe evenly, but each breath brushed against pain. Adam stood alone with the certainty that at any moment the world could twist. Until he was blamed again. Nikki watched Victor and knew if he broke, everything would break with him. Victor stood in his own silence, carrying a determination so fierce it could burn down the very home he was trying to defend. And just when they convinced themselves, the ultimatum was only the opening shot of a confrontation still days away. A new message appeared on that wasn't aimed at a single phone, but felt like it was placed in the center of their family like a blade stuck into the table. One short sentence, cold enough to steal the breath from the room. Matt doesn't want to confront the Newmans. Where they're prepared, he's going to strike where they'll never see it coming. And he has already chosen who will pay first. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.